Welcome, everyone. Happy holidays. I hope you guys have your champagne ready and are excited to join us for the last Talk, Taste, and Travel of 2020. My name is Kristen Sandvig. I'm the founder of LIONHOUND Travel here in Houston. And with me, I have Adele Corrigan. Adele, introduce yourself to
Hi,
everyone who I'm sure already knows us by now.
I'm Adele from 13 Celsius, the wine bar, handling all of the wine things for today's lovely episode. I can't believe it's the last one of the year. Hopefully, I think we'll be continuing next year.
That's the plan. But we do want to just say thank you to you guys. Uh, it has been a crazy year for all of us, and there have been lots of unexpected twists and turns. And I think I speak for both of us when I say it really has been a joy to connect with you guys on a weekly basis, to share a glass of wine or a bottle or more, and talk about the world and all of the places that we will soon be able to visit again. So if you haven't opened up your wine tonight, I invite you guys to raise a glass of champagne of the first one. Adele, what's our first one of the night?
So the first one is the Vazart Cocart Perifit, the Blanc de Noir. Here's the label for those who might not be able to see it. Yeah, I'm opening mine up right now. I'm going to pour a glass.
Likewise. So I just want to toast to you, Adele, and to all of you guys who join us here every week. Thank you for being a part of this, and we are excited to continue on in 2021 and make and adapt and grow as the year changes and as our lives change. So cheers to you guys. Thank you for everything.
Cheers. All right, I've got my glass poured.
Perfect. Have a sip, and let's dive in. Let's get started right away. We have a lot to cover tonight. I do want to make a quick announcement and let you guys know that we've kind of broken up this episode into two different parts. We're starting with the champagne, and then we'll get into the Chablis, the two Burgundy wines, later in the show. We will have a little bit of an intermission since we're covering a lot, and we want everybody to be able to participate and to ask questions and to chat. So we'll have about 15-20 minutes in the middle of the show where we'll take a break. I'll stop the recording if you guys want to take your or put your cameras on and jump in, and we'll talk about champagne, we'll talk about Paris, we'll talk about the holidays, and if anyone needs to, go grab a bite to eat or a snack or anything, you can take a few minutes. But we are dividing things up a little bit like that this show. So Adele, I'll pass it off to you. Let's talk about these first two champagnes and begin our journey into one of my favorite countries in the entire world.
So today's episode, we're going to do two different champagnes that are of two opposite styles, although they have some likenesses, such as, of course, they're made in the same way. Both of them are from like small grower producers, but they're both made from different grapes and will come out tasting very different from each other. So I really encourage you, if you want to open both of these tonight, so you can do a side-by-side comparison, will be really, really cool. But I do understand if you don't have a whole lot of people and it's only Wednesday, if you want to save one of these bottles for, New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve or another holiday coming up, of course, it is.
Adele, I have a quick question. If you were going to save one for Christmas or New Year's or a special occasion, which one of these bottles would you save?
This is hard to say because the thing is, like, they're both about the same price point, and we're going to get into different styles of champagne that you might like more than others. But if you tend to like things that are a little bit more crisp and appley, open up the first one. If you like things that are a little bit more round, fruity, and floral, open up the second one. But we'll get into that as we go on. Let's look at the map. Let's talk about Champagne, where it's from. So we know that Champagne region is close to Paris. It's about a 90-minute train right away. And you're sort of in the hills that sort of surround the city of Reims. And all of the different vineyard areas you'll see on that map have different grapes that grow better in certain areas. The Côte de Blanc, of course, has more Chardonnay and more white grapes. And then other areas like the Vallée de la Marne has more Pinot Noir. If you didn't know already, Champagne is a blend of 3 different grapes. Technically it's 7, but there's 3 main grapes: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. We are going to talk pretty extensively about these 3 grapes, or the fact that Champagne is a blend throughout the episode. So just remember that little factor. And also, those who think that they don't like Chardonnay, you are wrong, especially if you love Champagne, because Champagne, you know, like the first one that we're drinking is a Blanc de Blanc. But, you know, if you are looking at this map in comparison to the rest of France, we're pretty far north. Just like in the last episode that we had talked about, where we were in Germany and the region of like most of like the wine regions produced in Germany kind of straddle that 50th parallel. It's some of the more farther north possible areas of growing grapes that can properly ripen in the entire world. So, and knowing that Champagne has had an issue with fully ripening their grapes is one of the key to the successes of making really, really good wines. If you have underripe grapes, they're gonna be more acidic. More acidic wines make better sparkling wines. So another thing just to kind of keep in mind as we continue throughout our journey. But you know, everyone thinks that Champagne started as a sparkling region, but actually it didn't. Champagne originally, with the history of it, some people think was at one point coins to Dom Perignon, but we're gonna make a couple myths debunked, I guess, today, or some false things that most people think that Dom Perignon created Champagne. He actually did not. So everyone thinks of this quote that's like attributed to Dom Perignon: "Come quickly, I'm tasting the stars." It's actually not said by him at all. It was a quote that appeared in a print advertisement almost 100 years after he died. Dom Perignon, he was a monk. He did live and work in the Abbey of Haute-Villers, which was close to Epernay, right in like the heart of Champagne. And he was their cellar master. He was a pivotal figure in the development of the Champagne process, the varieties that are grown, the blending, and many different things, but he did not actually invent Champagne. There were several things that he did achieve, and I know a lot of like wine nerds and other historians make sure that the record is set straight. Dom Perignon was born Pierre Perignon. He was actually born in Champagne as well. He was 19 when he entered the Benedictine order, and being the cellar master at this abbey under his stewardship, the abbey itself actually doubled the size of their vineyard holdings, which was really a sign of like the respect and the honor and also the success of him being their cellar master for so long. In fact, Dom Perignon was buried in a section of the abbey that traditionally was reserved only for abbots because they valued him and what he did for the abbey so much. Dom Perignon worked tirelessly at perfecting the quality of the wines that were produced here, but they used to make still wines. In fact, they didn't want to make sparkling. Dom Perignon actually spent years and years and years trying to study the process to stop the sparkle and to stop the bubbles in the wine themselves. You know, it was seen as a fault in a wine if you purchased it and then you open up the bottle and it was sparkling. And it was also a concern because at the time, you know, French glass was a little bit thinner and it would break. So what common time, you know, occurred was that you would harvest these grapes, you'd make a still wine, winter would happen and your bottles are sort of aging in this very cold environment, but it turns out that they weren't actually done fermenting. So when the springtime comes and maybe the wine's being transported to, you know, England, to Britain, which drank a lot of really good quality wine and sort of like drove what people thought was popular during that time in, you know, the 1700s. And as the environment and the climate would like warm up a little bit, so would the bottles, and it would actually restart the fermentation inside the bottle. So people thought that they were getting a still wine that opened up, but it was sparkling because of the pressure of the CO2 not having anywhere to leave the bottle. It re-fermented inside. And in short, that's sort of like the Champagne method as well, which we have sort of pictured here. So just, I guess, knowing that, you know, how sparkling wine is made, which is now called the traditional method, starts with a base wine. Grapes are usually picked. It's fermented into a fully dry wine. It's usually very, very high in acid. And then There is a blending of yeast and some sugars. It starts the secondary fermentation, but inside each individual bottle. It's one of the only sparkling method processes that the fermentation happens inside the bottle. And when this happens, the process, it creates CO2, which is then trapped inside the bottle, thus carbonating the wine. And in this process, however, the yeast cells, they die, and they are still inside the bottle. They create kind of a sediment, and they also make the wine kind of cloudy, which is a little bit undesirable for most people. They want a clear, you can see through it, beautiful bubbles. So what they do is they actually take the champagne, they sort of store it inverted and slowly twist it ever so shortly into a more vertical position. And that way, all of the dead yeast cells over a period of time, they slowly collect in the neck of the bottle. And this process is called sort of like riddling. And then after all of the sediment is like all the way in the bottom of the neck, they'll freeze just the neck part. It's called disgorgement. They'll pop off the cap. It'll shoot out all the yeast cells and just a little bit of wine. Invert the bottle back up very quickly. Top it off with a little bit of a liqueur de tirage, or sometimes just like a little bit of like a mixture of more wine plus a little bit of sugar, which is up to the winemaker depending on how much sugar they want to include or not include, because that will determine the final flavors and how they'll label the wine at the very end. And then they'll top it off with a cork, put a little cage on it, seal it up just right. And then it usually will sit in a cellar for even longer, just to sort of age and condition inside the bottle, developing some of those more oxidized flavors. The process is very complex. It's very, very long. And, there's a champagne book that has volumes to it that we can go on and on and on and on forever, just about champagne. But this is one of the only regions in the world that does this. Kristen has the champagne volume 1 and 2, it looks like, plus like a really big map that it comes with, that someone has spent their whole life compiling as much information, and I'm sure they're still out there. But so from the champagne process, there's different flavors and different styles that can come across, that can come about, that taste different. So if you're ever looking for your own, signature style, you like this, but you don't like that, throughout this episode, we're here to give you some tips to sort of figure out what's next. So Kristen, let's talk about maybe some of the main styles of champagne. So Blanc de Blanc, Blanc de Noir, Rosé. There's also vintage champagne as well. So if you see Blanc de Blanc, it means white of white. They use only white grapes, Chardonnay. Chardonnay is the main white grape that grows in Champagne. Then you have Blanc de Noirs, which is white of reds. This is one of the processes that Dom Perignon actually did improve. He was able to make a clear wine from a red grape. The red grapes most commonly used in Blanc de Noirs are Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, which are the 2 main grapes that we're using in wine number 2. Generally, Blanc de Noirs tend to be just a little bit more fruity and a little bit more floral. And then, of course, you have rosé champagne, which are like the most beautiful pink bubbles. That's usually not sweet. They're super awesome, and it's made with just like either adding a little bit of actual Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier fully fermented like red wine in to give it that pink kind of color, or sometimes it could be made through a saignée method, which is like it's called the bleeding method. It's bleeding off the first press of juice, which isn't fully dark in color, it's just slightly pink. Then they'll use that to ferment into the wine and then undergo the secondary fermentation. And then, of course, there's vintage wines, things that have been from a specific year that are outstanding, that were worth bottling on their own. And those wines are always the most expensive and always some of the most delicious, bready, yeasty, toasty, nutty styles that we think of that highlight really great champagne. So the first wine that we're having today is a Blanc de Blanc. It's 100% Chardonnay, and it's from a Grand Cru vineyard called Chouy. This is Jean-Pierre Vazart, and he represents the 3rd generation of winemakers. And he sort of represents the brand that was created by his grandparents that is done in a grower-style champagne. And what does that mean? There's 2 kind of main houses or growers when you're talking about producers of champagne. There's the huge houses. They purchase their grapes from other farmers. They usually have contracts that they have to purchase fruit from other growers, whether the vintage was good or bad, and they blend it all in. And then there's grower champagnes, and those are the producers that not only do they grow, they bottle, they produce all on the property, they're hands-on, they're farmers, and they produce their own product. So some people would say that this is a better quality product because they're involved in every single step of the process. How can you tell if you've got a grower champagne? So if you take your bottle in the back, all grower champagnes have RM and then a series of numbers followed by a dash and 2 more numbers. But RM stands for like real, oh shit, I'm gonna mess it up. Reculant, manipulant, it's a French word, RM, but that specifically means that this is a grower champagne. You can't put this on the label. It won't have an RM and a little dash and the numbers in the back if it is not a grower champagne. And this is definitely something at 13, and me personally as a consumer, that I always look for. You want to support the farmer fizz. You want to support the smaller producers. And, you know, when Kristen and I were talking earlier today just about like how when we started Talk Taste Travel, and it was April, and a lot of like the bars and restaurants were closed, and we were sort of wanting to, in addition, give you guys something fun to do on Wednesdays and stay connected, but also sort of bringing light to some of the smaller wineries that don't have a lot of retail presence. They're not sold in the big grocery stores. You only see them in restaurants. And when all the restaurants are closed around the world, all of these producers are also suffering. All of these small distributors are also suffering, in addition to us little wine shops and little restaurants that are, you know, chef driven, that you don't really get to see. So for me, I always look for grower champagnes. Is anyone tasting this wine?
That's one of the sorry, I just wanted to jump in and say that's one of the things that I've always loved about 13 Celsius is that as a bar and a shop, you guys always have highlighted these really small production wines that have you can like feel the intimacy in the wine of like the care that went into it. And some of them are really expensive, some of them are not at all, and you really get a full range, but there is that personal touch. And I think, you know, we always say that anybody can buy, anyone can make good expensive wine, but to be able to kind of operate, especially like at Champagne, to have a bottle of wine that on a menu is $70 or something and is a Grand Cru champagne and is something really special, that I think is a testament to the quality of the farming, the technique, the care, because these growers, they're invested in everything from start to finish. And I think personally, I love grower champagne. That's, I mean, if I know nothing about a wine or a champagne, that's a sales point for me. You've got me hooked once you say that. And so yeah, it's exciting, and that's one of the things that I love about what you guys do over there. But let's who's drinking this one?
Yeah, so if you're tasting this wine,
concept of grower champagne before.
I don't know, show of hands. Well, if you are tasting this wine, there's also something else pretty cool. So this is a non-vintage champagne. This is very common in the Champagne region. They blend vintages, and that's sort of to create a house style. And that is so that year after year after year, the champagne will taste the same. And the house style is created by someone who probably started the property, or the winemaker or cellar master or whoever, with the intention that, you know, they want it to be consistent. It's one of the only regions in the world that really does this process. So in this one in particular, we have a non-vintage. So sometimes they might take some, you know, Chardonnay from 2011. They'll blend it in with the current stuff, but they also create a Solera system, and it actually started in 1975. So they'll have like a little bit of the 1975 that they'll pull in, and then some of the 85, the 82, the 2009, and they'll sort of like blend all of these little vintages together. So in this wine, you are drinking probably like 1/100th of some of the 1975 vintage when they started the Solera and started the winery. So that's pretty cool. You see the Solera system and when they make sherry as well. But this is something a little bit unique about this wine.
And that's called a cuvee, right?
Yeah, cuvee just means blend.
Right. And yeah. I've always thought of a cuvee specifically in regards to champagne as like a recipe. So where a chef will create a recipe to allow other people to kind of create a consistency with the quality, of the food amongst the cooks in the kitchens. And I've always thought of a cuvee as what that is for champagne, where it's their way of creating consistency with the product over the years as different people come in and out of the winery, so that it always theoretically holds up to the quality that by bringing in both good and bad vintages from every year.
Yeah. So this wine, to me, it's very light. It's very fine. It has that on the nose. You can tell there's a chalky minerality underneath it. If we're starting in layers, we're going to start at the bottom layer. After that, to me, I get like a fruit lift, like a tart green apple, maybe like yellow, sort of like a yuzu citrus, kind of Meyer lemon. And then the very top note, it's almost like a jasmine, like a white floral kind of thing that's going on, citrus blossom or something. I think this wine is very delicate. And on the palate, of course, I mean, it's delicious. It's very, very drinkable. It's got good acidity to it, but it also has a little bit more body. I would say that this is more of an example of your tart, fruit-driven wines. I don't get a whole lot of toasty brioche notes on this one at all. I would say this is more your linear style.
So that, I think, is a good segue into what kind of foods you would put with a champagne that does have kind of that more linear style compared to the like more fuller yeasty kind of ones. So what would you eat with this?
We can compare and contrast acid and fats if we wanted to do some sort of like a fattier fish. I always love oysters with you think of like oysters in a mignonette sauce, oysters in champagne. Champagne almost acts like your lemon. It acts like your tart sort of, acid that goes onto your raw oyster as you put it into your mouth. Chris and I, we talked about just like the ultimate cold seafood platter with, your chilled shrimp and some sort of like a scallop crudo, something that has like a fatty scallop, because that fatty creaminess and then like the piercing acidity of this wine will just cleanse your palate clean and leave you, wanting more.
Yes, 100% agree with you on that. Champagne, I also think of as, and maybe this is for like some of the richer style ones. Tell me what you think, but like French fries and potato chips and kind of those same like snack foods where you can, there you go. And I love champagne with like those higher acid cheeses like goat cheese and with Greek salad and feta and kind of the tanginess of those dressings with a little bit of that vinegar in there. But 100% my favorite champagne pairing of all time is oysters. I just got back from a work trip this past weekend, and the 2 final nights of my my business trip, I guess, we did champagne and oyster tastings both nights in a row, and it was amazing. I was like, oh my God, they're speaking to me. They know who I am. They've looked into my soul. So it was a nice way to end.
It looked delicious and beautiful. Your pictures were absolutely gorgeous.
Thanks. And just side note for later, I do have an interesting story that ties in to today's show, specifically in regards to a chef at a particular restaurant that we'll be talking about later. So with that, do you have any last notes you want to add about this wine before we kind of continue our journey through Champagne and France?
If anyone is interested in any more bottles of this, I have probably about a case left over at the bar. If you guys enjoyed this and wanting to pick up a few more of the bottles, they were fairly, inexpensive. We also featured this on our wine sale, which just ended. So thank you those who purchased for our wine sale. It was a fantastic sale for us. We really appreciated it.
Yes, that's awesome. I can't wait to hear more about how that went. But let's continue. You did touch on Rome and Epernay as 2 of the places to visit in Champagne. And these are two very different parts of the region. Rome tends to be the more easily accessible. It's about 90 minutes from Paris. And then Epernay is a little bit more quaint and it's a little bit farther south. There are 5 main regions in Champagne, and Rome is the place to stay to explore the Montagne de Rome, which focuses primarily on Pinot Noir and these Blanc de Noirs. This zone makes the fullest bodied champagnes, and they often are intended to age. By contrast, if you base yourself in Epernay, you can explore more of the Pinot Meunier focused region of Vallée de la Marne, and you can also stay here to go to the Côte de Blanc. And these tend to be the 3 highlights of these regions that most travelers want to visit. They hold the greatest interest for people, and you can technically visit all 3 in a single day. It is best to plan this in advance because you'll want to have a driver if you're drinking champagne and hitting all of these places. But what I love about Champagne is if you're planning a trip to Paris, it really is easy to do this as a single day getaway and check out lots of the highlights without necessarily dedicating a whole separate trip to it. I have lots of people who love to visit Paris, and Paris is such a well-connected destination to so many other major cities in Europe. And with direct flights from Houston to Paris, typically, it's a really great place to spend a couple of nights and add on and always do something different when you're there. You never run out of things to do in Paris. And the more you go, the more you realize how there are these little interesting day trips that you can take. And this happens to be one of them. Rome tends to have the big names that most of us are familiar with. These household names like Taittinger, Ruinart, Eric Rodez, and Veuve Clicquot, many of these famous ones that we see at the liquor stores, at grocery stores for lots of money on wine lists. And then Epernay tends to be a little bit more removed. Rome is definitely the more touristy town. It's a university city. It is a bustling little like mini metropolis. And then Epernay has a much more quaint kind of feel. There is this row of champagne houses that you can visit. Down in Epernay is where you'll find, I believe it's Moet and Chandon, and what's the other one? Oh, Perrier-Jouët. And those are the big ones that you'll really find down there. But Epernay tends to be a little bit more quiet. It's a little bit more under the radar. But you have a little bit more access to more of Champagne in Epernay. So I think if you're visiting from Paris as a day trip, focus your trip around Rome. If you have a night or 2 to spend and you really want to immerse yourself in the region, then go to Epernay. And that leads me into the Royal Champagne Hotel and Spa, which is located just outside of Epernay. And this property overlooks the vineyards that stripe the hills of France's Champagne region. The newly renovated property reimagines the wine country retreat. It's very French in style, but it's very modern and very clean at the same time. It's spread across this modernist wing in a 19th century post house, and it only has 49 rooms that embrace the lush bounty of the wineries and the UNESCO World Heritage Site that surround it, while bringing to the region the first world-class destination spa and a chef-led gastronomic restaurant tied all together in one. And the menus are crafted daily with sparkling wine in mind, specifically the wines from this region, so that every option on the menu complements the beautiful wines that come from here. The property is absolutely beautiful. They have the restaurant has 1 Michelin star. And if you are looking for kind of that wellness getaway without having to cut out your champagne, because let's face it, champagne is a part of wellness. Wine is a part of wellness. Balance is a part of wellness. This is the perfect place to pair with a trip to Paris. And with that, we did mention that we're only about a 90-minute train ride from Paris. So let's dive into the big city that we're visiting this show, which is Paris. And this is an incredible city. It is the largest city in France. It's the capital city of France. It is such a well-connected international destination. We have daily direct flights from Houston under normal circumstances, and there's so much to see. Paris seems to be a place where people, it brings out feelings in you. Some people love it. Some people are like, whatever. If you're like, whatever, you just haven't done it right, because it's a fantastic city. There's so much to see. There's so much history, and there's so many French people. And I personally have only had positive experiences with the French. You hear lots of stories about people being rude, but I think in the hospitality industry, if you're going to restaurants, if you're staying at hotels, the people you're meeting, they want you to love Paris the way they love Paris. And every experience I've had there has made me love it more and more. And it truly is one of my favorite cities in the world. Paris is divided into two by the Seine River. So that's this little blue strip going in. And for today's show, we've broken up Paris the way we've broken up the wines. So north of the Seine is the right bank of Paris. And then south of the Seine, underneath the blue line, is the left bank. And so when you're visiting Paris, you typically hear left bank, right bank, and you have these little different neighborhoods on each side. It's kind of confusing how they work. They like go in a spiral and go out and out, where number one starts like where Palais Royal and the Louvre Museum are right in the center. And then they kind of spiral seashell out from there. But today we will focus on the right bank first. And there are some of the most beautiful hotels and classic hotels in all of the world on France's right bank, or on Paris's right bank. And Paris is a city that they have some properties that have gone so above and beyond in service that they have a Palais class, which is like a 6-star hotel. So there's a ton of 5-star properties, but then they have, I think there are 6 properties that have been elevated to that extra level where their service, their design, their history is so above and beyond that the Parisian government gave them extra credit. So there are amazing properties here, but I did just want to touch on 3 of my favorites. Hotel de Crillon is a rosewood property, fresh off a head-to-toe refurbishment. This hotel is the epitome of the elegance and the spirit of Paris. It has so much more of a warm Parisian apartment feel to it. You can sink into the warmth and the refinement of the guest rooms with a comfortable blend of 18th century heritage and contemporary creature comforts. The dining options include one of Paris's best-kept secrets, La Crine, the distinctive Brasserie Domont, and Jardin des Verts, the hotel's favorite rendezvous spot, L'Ambassadeur. All come together to create these hidden little choices that you can access all while you're on property. The second one that I love is La Réserve. It's known for having this super traditional facade with the red door. They also have apartments that are on the other side of the neighborhood. And you can actually, if you rent an apartment, which is a great option for families, you actually can order room service from the main hotel and they will deliver it across the city to you. It's like 10 or 15 minutes, but it's something super cool and they really elevate the service there. The City of Light truly sparkles at this property, and it's minutes from the Grand Palais and the Champs-Élysées, and it's a 19th century urban mansion, and it is the essence of French refinement. The hotel has a private club atmosphere. Only guests can access the main library, the smoking lounge, the pool, the fitness center, and the accommodations feature silk walls, velvet drapes, and a brocade taffeta. Expect ultra-personalized service, including tailored experiences that reveal exclusive sides of Paris. The gastronomic offerings surprise and delight. There are two Michelin-starred, there's a two Michelin-starred restaurant here, and it recently won the best dining experience in my consortium, Virtuoso's award ceremony last year. And then the last property I want to talk about, not the last property I want to talk about, one of the other properties that I want to highlight on the right bank is the George Cinq, which is part of the Four Seasons. You might not recognize that person who's hanging over the balcony with a glass of champagne, but that's me. And you have these amazing views from the hotel. This was during a tour of the penthouse, so unfortunately not every room on the property has that view, but this hotel is famous for its floral arrangements in the main lobby. The hotel has partnered with a local florist, and they change out the flowers daily, and you always see these elaborate arrangements that really bring this personalization to the property. There are two Michelin-starred restaurants at the George Cinq. One has 1 star, the other has 3 stars. And the rooms are very bright and clean and very bright and clean and fresh and updated without losing that very French personality and design and feel. It is a truly classic hotel, and it is in a fantastic location to get out and about and walk around. Then the last property I want to touch on is, if I had to choose one hotel in all the world, for me, it's the Ritz Paris. This place is unlike any other I've ever been. It has this magical old world feel to it. They underwent this huge renovation a few years ago. And one of the criticisms of the renovation was that they didn't change anything. They just updated all of the soft goods. They redid everything exactly as it was, but it feels like they brought this old world hotel back to life. It is so beautiful. It is so French. The Hemingway bar is where Bar Hemingway is where they created the cocktail called the Sidecar. They are known for having the best martini. Colin Field is this super renowned bartender, and you walk into this little bar. There are 20 seats in it, and you feel like you are going back in time. This is probably one of my, I have such a good relationship with this hotel, and every time I go there, whether I'm staying there or not, I walk in and I feel like I'm home. I feel like I'm taken care of, and my contacts there bring that same sense of service and touch to my clients, and I always get such positive feedback about it. And each suite has its own story and history. There's a Windsor suite that's named after the royal family because of a time when some of the members from the family spent living in the hotel. There is a Coco Chanel suite, which I've actually been in, and Coco Chanel lived there for a while. She posted up at the Ritz Paris for a couple of years. And then you've got Bar Hemingway, where Hemingway was known for going and getting drunk, and as he did. But this hotel is so full of history. I absolutely love it. If you ever have a chance to stay here, it's a bucket list hotel, and in my opinion, something that is a true little destination in itself within Paris. So with that, let's continue on. And lots of these places are so easily accessible from any of these hotels. There's so much to do and see in Paris that it's tough to cover everything, but I want to touch on some of the highlights, specifically the Louvre Museum. All of you guys have heard of it. It's the most visited museum in the world. In 2017, it welcomed more than 8 million visitors. Inside this formal royal palace, you'll find some of the most iconic pieces of art in history, from Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa to the famous Venus de Milo statue. This is a massive building, and you want to plan your visit before you arrive. You can actually download the museum's app on your phone and visit the sites on your own within the museum, or you can go with an art history specialist and get a little bit deeper into everything if that's exciting to you. One thing that's super cool is how this extra modern pyramid is the entryway to a museum that houses works from the antiquity through the 1800s. And one question that I often get as a travel advisor is, what's the difference between the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it's just time, where I think it's like 1884 or 1889. I'll double check that for y'all. But the Louvre cuts off at a specific date, and the Musée d'Orsay picks up after that date and goes to 1914. So the style of work you see in each museum is very, very different. The second site that I want to touch on Paris's right bank is the Arc de Triomphe. The Champs-Élysées is one of Paris's most iconic streets, and lining the boulevard on either side are manicured trees leading up to another of the city's top attractions, which is the Arc de Triomphe. It was commissioned by Napoleon, who we visited during our trip to Corsica a couple months ago in 1806. And the Arc de Triomphe was built to celebrate his victory at the Battle of Austerlitz. If you're looking for an incredible sunset spot in Paris, you can climb the 300 stairs to the top of the building and watch the sun go down from there. Then the last place to cover is the Sacré-Cœur in the iconic Montmartre neighborhood. And this is the Sacred Heart Basilica here in Paris. It's north of the city, and the lawn in front of it is beautiful. If you love the architecture in the cathedrals, this is a must visit. It's recognized by its beautiful white facade, and it's one of my favorite spots to go and just have a picnic on the lawn. This is one of the places that I recommend being careful when you, with your stuff. It's the only place in Paris where I've heard of anybody I know ever having an issue with pickpockets. So it's really beautiful, and I think people let their guard down while they're relaxing on the lawn and sunbathing and napping in the sun, which is worth it, but just hold everything close to you while you're there, because it's possible stuff could happen. A couple of day trips that we have to touch on before we get back to our wine drinking today: Versailles and Mont Saint-Michel. Versailles, the Palace of Versailles, it's about 40 minutes outside of Paris, and it's been listed as a World Heritage Site for 30 years. It's one of the greatest achievements in French 17th century art, and it was Louis XIII's old hunting pavilion. It was transformed and extended by his son, Louis XIV, when he installed the court and government there in 1682. Then a succession of kings continued to embellish the palace up until the French Revolution. The gardens are fantastic. The fountains are going off. The fountains go off on Saturday mornings. And one thing that I really like to do is advise people to rent a bike and hang out in the gardens and bike through them after touring the palace. It's a really nice way to make an entire day of that experience. Well, when you make the trip there, it's an easy train ride from Paris, but when you're making the trip there, if you want to do something a little bit outside of town, your trip doesn't have to stop once you've completed walking around the interior. You really can spend time exploring the grounds, and that's when you'll see some of the most pretty parts of the area. Then Mont Saint-Michel is a Benedictine monastery in Normandy. And it's iconic for being on a rocky islet in the middle of this vast sandbank that's exposed to the powerful tides between Normandy and Brittany. It's been known as a wonder of the West, and the Gothic-style Benedictine abbey is dedicated to the Archangel Michael. The village grew up in the shadow of its great walls, and it was built between the 11th and 16th centuries. It is a technical and artistic tour de force, and it's had to adapt over the years to problems posed by its unique natural site. It's so cool to visit. If you're into photography, this is probably on your list of places to go outside of Paris, either at sunrise or sunset, when the light's really beautiful and when the tide's changing. And these are just really fantastic ways to complete a really balanced trip to Paris. So with that, let's get back to Champagne. We're heading back on that 90-minute train ride and returning to get into our second wine of the night. So Adele, tell us about this next one that we're drinking and what stands out about it compared to the first.
Real quick, I had actually a couple of questions about visiting Versailles. Do you need a reservation or an appointment or buy tickets or anything like that?
You do need a ticket to Versailles. You can, so technically you need a reservation, but you can get them the day before. There are different ways to do it because if you buy them in advance, it tends to be less expensive, and you can package it with the train ticket as well. You don't necessarily need a guide to visit, though.
Okay.
So that's you.
How far of a trip is that out?
It's about 40 minutes.
Okay. And the same thing with the Mont Saint-Michel, Michael.
Mont Saint-Michel is a little bit farther. It's I think between 90 minutes to 2 hours on train. It is typically done, if you're doing it with a group tour, it's typically a 5-hour round trip experience. And so they'll include the transportation out there, and then you can either visit the Abbey guided, or you can just kind of wander around on your own. They'll typically pair it and do part of it guided, and then give you an hour to hang out in the village and explore the village on your own. But anything on a private basis can obviously be extended, or if you want something a little bit more in depth, or you want to relax and see more, or just tag it off and then come home.
Cool. Thank you. That was my 2 little questions about that.
Yeah.
So for you guys, hopefully you finished your first glass or taste of the first champagne. And for those who are joining along and opening up both bottles like I just did, we are now onto the Cerveau Carte Noire. This is another grower champagne. If you look it over, flip on the back side, you'll see the RM plus a 5 or 6 digit number dash 2 more numbers. So this is another really cool grower champagne. And it was started in the 50s by George Cerveau. He was one of the rare visionaries who had faith in this region called the Vallée de la Marne as this up-and-coming wine industry. But he was broke, and so he borrowed some money from a friend who was a First World War veteran, a World War I veteran, and he helped George buy his first plots of land on these local slopes in the Vallée de la Marne. George himself, he wasn't exactly sure how he was going to pay back the loan, but he was starting to clear the land and came across some really old walnut trees, sold that lumber, and was actually able to pay off his friend for the plot of land. And then, of course, he planted some vines, specifically that of Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. Pinot Meunier is the third sort of under the radar grape of Champagne. And arguably Cerveau is one of the few families that managed to give a new life to this variety that had kind of been on the decline a few years ago. And most of the wines in their collection are made of the Pinot Meunier. For a very long time, George was in charge of the property. Now it's been passed on to his son, Pascal. They have about 15 hectares, so it's a very, very small property. And it's really cool, I think, to taste this wine in comparison to the one that we had before. This one in front of you, if you are drinking it, it's 50% Pinot Noir and 50% Pinot Meunier, but you look at it, the color, it's clear. So they are able to harvest the grapes, and they're able to press the juice and separates the skins from the juice. So if you ever look at like a Pinot Noir grape, Pinot Noir is a fairly thin-skinned grape. So if you open it up, the inside flesh is, you know, clearish green. The skin is where all the color is. So if you gently crush the grapes and then separate the skins, and you're only using the juice from the inside and the pulp and the seeds, you're gonna get a clear wine. But you get some of the interesting fruit flavors of Pinot Noir or of Pinot Meunier, which is also, Pinot Meunier on its own is also a light red grape that's very sort of strawberry cherry fruited. And this one in particular is more of that fruity style. It's fruity and it's creamy. It reminds me of like a strawberry shortcake. Like it's got like those like bright strawberry notes to it. It's a little bit less in acid than the wine before, and it coats your mouth like all over. This does have just a little bit more of a dosage to this wine. It has like 8 grams per liter, so it is just slightly sweeter than the one that we had before. I hate using the word sweet when we describe wines because most people, you know, they're afraid of sweet, but it's more fruity, I guess is like the more PC wine term. But just because we say sweet doesn't mean it's like dessert sweet. It just means that it's like slightly, you know, slightly ever so much sweeter than especially in comparison to the one before, which was very green apple. It was very tart, it was very acidic. So what style of champagne from just tasting these two, you know, might be best for you if you're looking for something special to open for New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve or any sort of like holiday after this. Kristen, please flip the slides here. I think the next one, yeah, sort of talks about, or this picture that I found that sort of like highlights, there's 4 really main styles and flavor profiles that you're gonna find in champagne. You're gonna find your dry, lean, zesty, and these are usually like wine number 1, your non-vintage, mostly Chardonnay or Chardonnay focused, mineral driven wines. The next style, your fruity and floral, like wine number 2, those are gonna be your red fruited, your Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, Blanc de Noir style wines. And then when you get to the rich and creamy and nutty, those are your vintage styles, the ones that have seen, you know, 7, 8 to 20 years of age on them. And usually those ones as well are mostly Chardonnay focused. And then of course you have like your sweet and your perfumed, and those are like demi-sec wines. Those are meant to be sort of like enjoyed maybe with a dessert or something like that, that are noticeably sweet. Again, we use Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Pinot Noir. There are other grape varieties that are permitted in Champagne, but you rarely ever see them. But the most common secondary grape I get, or second popular grape you can see, is Pinot Blanc. There's also like Petit Meslier and like a few others that I can't quite remember. But let's look at a sweetness scale for Champagne. Here's something interesting. You have something on the scale that says extra dry and extra brut. That doesn't actually mean like extra dry is going to be drier than your regular brut. It actually is sweeter. And your extra brut is the one that's drier than brut. This is where things get really confusing when you're reading a label if you don't have this previous information or if you've never heard of this before. So, you know, most people gravitate towards brut, but brut's not actually the driest possible style. You actually start with brut nature. And so this is a process during the winemaking that is either a choice of the winemaker or the house style. And they're choosing after they have, you know, riddled the bottles, all the sediments and all the lees are in the neck of the bottle. They shoot it out, they invert the bottle, they top it back off with a little bit of wine, and then also just a little bit of sugar to sort of restart the fermentation process. And the choice of how much sugar to put in determines the final style of the wine. So you start with brut nature, which means that during that process, they didn't put any sugar in it. Then you have extra brut, they added just a little bit, and then brut, which is your common style. You need, for most part, a little bit of sugar because the wine underneath it is very acidic, and the sugar helps to counterbalance that acid. If anyone who's ever had like a brut nature, it's like teeth ripping enamel off, super duper tart, which is not always enjoyable, but in some instances, in some producers, they do it very well. So it is natural to find just a little bit of sugar in champagne. And of course, as you go up the scale, you're extra dry. It's kind of tricky. You would think that extra dry would mean that it's extra dry, but it's actually not. It's actually a little bit more sugar than your average brut styles. And then of course you get into your demi-sec on the very far end of the scale. And this has quite a bit of sugar. This is sort of like if you like Moscato, but you want to try something different and spend a lot of money, you do the demi-sec. And then even further than that is like the Doux, which is the fully blown, like sweet styles. Most houses to the day, they don't really make these styles anymore. They're not popular, so they don't waste the money, they don't waste their juice and their time and effort on making these. I've only really come across like one other demi-sec style, and I have one at the bar, and it's actually in like a little half bottle. It's about $40. So come by and try this, because I think a lot of people don't get to see demi-sec, and it's not that sweet. It's actually very floral, it's very, very pretty. But most producers, they don't even like waste their time anymore. So along with sweetness, we have to address, why does everyone feel awful after drinking champagne? Why does it always give you a headache? Well, it's not necessarily that it's champagne that's giving you a headache. There's a couple things to consider when you're drinking. First of which, are you drinking later in the night because it's a special occasion, like your birthday? Are you out and about in a dance club, and therefore you're drinking a lot and you're actively like working? Or are you sitting in a hot tub with a bunch of friends? You don't realize it because you're hot in the hot tub, but you're actually sweating a lot. You're dehydrating yourself, and you're drinking alcohol, which is also something that dehydrates you. The other thing is, anything that's carbonated, you naturally drink more of. Whether it's beer or soda or champagne, you tend to drink more, and you don't feel thirsty because you're drinking something that quenches your thirst. And then, of course, it's very drinkable. It's easy to drink a whole bottle of champagne. It's also difficult, maybe to preserve unless you have like a proper stopper. So if you open something up, as a Jess White, a really good friend of ours, put, a bottle of champagne is a commitment. It is a serious commitment of your time, and it just dictates, the rest of your evening. And you're probably going to drink this tonight, if not maybe a little bit tomorrow, but it starts to lose its fizz and it's not quite as enjoyable.
I wish we had invited Jess, Adele. Yeah. That would have been.
We should have. In hindsight.
You who joined us when we did the New World, Oregon, Seattle, and New York, which was in May, I think. Jess White was one of our guests, and she loves champagne more than anyone I've ever met. And hearing her talk about champagne, it's an experience in itself, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's beautiful.
So with those, if you think about it, those three main reasons right there, it's not champagne really that's giving you a headache. It's all the other things around you. So just a reminder, New Year's Eve, Christmas Eve, whatever, if you are drinking a lot of champagne, don't forget to drink water. That'll help everything out. And yes, champagne tends to have a little bit more sugar in it, but your average brut style has less champagne than Kim Crawford Sauvignon Blanc, has a lot less sugar than your typical, even like your base level Rieslings. Cava, actually, of all the sparkling wines, has the most residual sugar for the most part. Most producers do. Than champagne or Prosecco or anything else, even though Prosecco sometimes can be sweeter in flavor. That's just the method that it's made in. So it's not necessarily the sugar always, although champagne does usually have more sugar than your traditional red wine. Just remember to drink water, pace yourself with champagne. So that's not necessarily why it's giving you the headache. But with this wine, let's talk about some food pairings, because this wine was a little bit fatter. It was a little bit more fruity. And so quiche Lorraine was something that we had thought of for this one for sure. Like eggs and champagne go pretty well together, and also just like something cheesy and salty and savory. You got that buttery little flaky crust of quiche Lorraine.
It's a breakfast wine.
It's a breakfast wine. Pew, 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 pew. Kristen's favorite. So if you can imagine, having some like brunch and champagne, or breakfast for dinner, we always like to recommend, something quiche related or egg related is always nice. What else would you try with this?
Um, I think this is we talked. I can't remember which wine we talked about this with, um, but escargot.
Yeah.
I mean, something very like traditional and French, uh, but I think but like a little bit meatier, you know, a little bit, there's like a little bit more to it than the shellfish. And I think that, and it tends to have a little bit more like butter to it.
Yeah.
And I think that would be something very like traditional to have with this.
Yeah. I was also thinking with this one too, like the white pizza, like
Yeah, that's
all the
right.
white
Mhm.
cheese, like the bechamel, and has like the lardons and like caramelized onions on top. I think would be really good with this too.
And I think the recipe that I sent out was for like clams and spaghetti and
Yeah.
garlic and butter. And I think, yeah, some of the, and I think specifically with Blanc de Noirs compared to like Blanc de Blancs, they can kind of hold up to more of the, you like the shellfish dishes where you have some more like starch and cream in there. That is a better pairing, where for the more linear acidic Chardonnay Blanc de Blanc style ones, those you want like really crisp clean flavors to go with those crisp clean flavors,
For
right?
sure. Someone in the chat, Aaron Fox recommended fondue, like a nice fondue. Hell yeah, I'm into that. We're actually having a fondue night tomorrow night for our like mini Christmas with my fiance's brother and sister-in-law.
Oh, that'll be
Yeah,
fun.
fondue night. So
Adele, I had a question for you. When we were talking about Brut Nature, do you have any producers that you really like or that you would recommend if somebody were to ever want to kind of work their way through the dry to sweetness
I
level?
am drawing the biggest producer blank right now. I saw that question there. I was trying to avoid it because I can't think of any right now. But
Sorry.
there are some out there. But again, it's a style that you don't see very often because it's not made most commonly.
Mhm.
So we'll send out like a post recap email, and I will have remembered, I'm sure, as soon as we get off this Zoom, who they are and where you can find them, because there are some on the market. I just can't think of any right now.
Well, good thing is we actually have our little intermission right now. So if you were a little late to sign on, we're having a little bit of an intermission style thing with Talk, Taste, and Travel tonight. I'm going to